Hey there, community group leaders.
Hey.
How's it going?
Hey.
Happy July 4th week.
Yes.
Hope you guys all got your fill of sunshine and hot dogs and barbecue and
Yes.
fireworks yesterday.
Yes.
Plus lots of friends and family time.
Or just sat home like I did and it was really nice.
A relaxing day.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking this summer just as we have a chance to kind of pull back from some of the normal craziness of life, or at least the craziness of life shifts a little bit into other
Different
things.
crazy.
Different crazy. Family vacation crazy.
Yeah.
So last month we talked to you guys about this idea of tending your soul in the summertime and some practices that can go along with that. This month, we want to talk about mission and this particular idea of a person of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we said a few months ago, the summertime is an amazing opportunity to connect with people that are far from Jesus. Like my missional community, we've been out at Capitola at the beach concerts quite a bit this summer, and making new relationships or deepening relationships with people that we had from like our kids' school or our kids' baseball team or other places around the community. So this missional thinkers, when they talk about evangelism, talk about this idea of a person of peace.
Yeah.
And it comes out of this passage from Luke 10, where Jesus is sending out the 72 and commissioning them, and he says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. Do not take a purse or bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. When you enter a house, first say, 'Peace to this house,' and if someone who promotes peace is there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will return to you. Stay there, eating and drinking whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages. Do not move around from house to house." So it's this idea that a person of peace is someone that receives you and welcomes you and Jesus within you.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes as Christians, we've all had that experience of that awkward conversation when someone finds out you go to church. We experience it all the time as pastors.
Just
right?
try telling people you're a pastor. It'll end the conversation about 9 times out of 10, or at least take it in a weird direction. So
yeah, the most common response I get is, "Oh,
yeah.
oh."
Yeah. I think the thing that with a person of peace, even just, if you will, biblically or doctrinally or theologically, if you want to think of it this way, is it's a recognition fundamentally is that God is already at work, and we get to enter into what he's already doing. I grew up in church, and evangelism, somehow I picked up the idea is that evangelism was about sharing my faith to try and make something happen, to try and get somebody to convince them of the truth of their lostness, to convince them of the truth of who Jesus is and how they needed him. All those things are true things, right? But it often doesn't take into account the fact that God is always previous. God is always working ahead of us. And so a person of peace is saying, hey, there are people around us that God, in ways that they maybe don't even know and we couldn't fully understand, yet God is already at work, and maybe they don't even realize that they're looking for something, or there's a God friendliness, if you will, in them, that they're beginning to, and that we get to step into something and into the life of someone where God is already at work. And so I think recognizing that we don't have to make something happen, it's starting to look for where is God working already in the life of somebody else.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a similar misconception that I grew up with, and that was, that I feel this responsibility to share the gospel with anyone around me who doesn't know Jesus. And that may be true to an extent, but I think this idea of a person of peace, that there's someone in my life that God is already working in, and when they find out who I am and that I bring Jesus with me, they're not repelled by that. I think that is an indication that God is calling us and the Spirit is inviting us to step more fully into that relationship. And so it's not like I need to give equal attention to every non-Christian relationship in my life. But I can walk down the road of relationship with this person and trust that God's going to use it somehow down the road.
Yeah, I think we have to recognize too that what we may not, to acknowledge that we may not be able to tell like in the first instant or in the first encounter with somebody well, they're because they're friendly or not friendly, or I experience them in a certain way. I can tell instantly whether they're this person of peace, or they have openness spiritually. Sometimes people that maybe initially seem friendly, when you kind of begin to have a little more than a surface level of conversation, things shut down quickly. Or on the other side, sometimes people that initially seem kind of, maybe a little distant or aloof, and then as you get to know them, maybe just because of their personality, you find that there's a lot more going on underneath that, and you just kind of get to walk with them a little bit and see where God's working. I think the other thing to know is that, it doesn't mean, like you said, that if someone doesn't display an openness, then we just sort of write them off.
No.
God will often do things over time in very unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, in a sense, being strategic. It is saying, there are people where when Jesus uses examples of different kinds of soils, when there's really hardened soil, well, our job isn't necessarily to try and take a pickaxe to it. We were going to look for that fertile soil or that person of peace. I think of, though, we'll talk about it unexpected. I've talked about him fairly often. Is our neighbor Ross, and Ross is in his 90s. He at first seemed very much not a person of peace. When we moved in 4 years ago, he was not happy that a pastor and his family were moving in, and I don't know what he thought that was going to be like. But over time, as one, we just were tried to be good neighbors. Just be friendly, serve them wherever we could see opportunity to do that, and just be nice. And then over time, he began to display more curiosity, to a point where, now Ross regularly asks me, well, what did you do today at church? And what do you do up there at that church? And I tell him, and then I've invited him, and he's even said I should come. And then Ross said something a couple weeks ago. It blew Kelly and I away. We were getting ready to leave, and he just said, maybe I do need to get saved. And we're like, what? And then Kelly, a few days later, had a longer conversation with Ross about that. So clearly Ross at this point is a person that is God's doing something there. Mm-hmm. So that, how do we lean in and say, God, you're at work there?
Yeah.
That's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah. And I love that too, because this took years to kind of unfold and develop. And I think that's often the case. It's not like, maybe God will grant us some of those, like, wow, I shared the gospel with someone like randomly and they got saved, like that happens. But I think more often than not, it's that slow, patient work of building relationship. And it really is just that. It's building a relationship. When we all went through Rooted, we talked about this idea of not making people into projects. And I think because people sniff that out, especially living in a culture like we do here in Santa Cruz. And so if you can patiently and slowly just love someone and invest in that relationship over time and not expect something out of it, eventually, if God's truly at work in this person's life, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think of my relationship with the guy that I met here at Beer 30 a few years ago, who's become a good friend, a avowed atheist, so very anti-Christian in a lot of ways. And yet over the last 3 years, we've had a lot of conversations, and, I'm the guy, that he's called a number of times when he's down. And even this week, he was having some medical stuff going on and couldn't make it to the doctor on his own. So he called me, and, still not a Christian, not ready to become a Christian yet, at least on the surface. But I'm beginning to see ways in which my relationship with him is changing how he views Christians. And I can only hope that, at some point along the line, God's going to work, because he hasn't rejected my relationship, even though he knows exactly what I stand for. But he seems like he's continually leaning in closer and closer.
I think a really practical way to see the person of peace dynamic lived out is actually it's right in the passage, but Jesus talks about, does this person welcome you into their home? And in that day, certainly hospitality in a Middle East culture was a universally valued practice. In fact, it would be unthinkable to not invite someone into your home that was a stranger. And so we don't live in that kind of culture, but I think the principle of hospitality is one that actually can and does open many doors to relationship. I think that it's perhaps one of the most undervalued and overlooked ways to practice living and sharing our faith that occurs today is like, so maybe ask yourself this question: when was the last time you had a non-Christian person, neighbor, friend, coworker, had them into your home to share a meal, or you and theirs? And there's something just so universal about sharing a meal, breaking bread with someone, sitting down over a table. It lowers barriers. It opens the door to conversation. It just eases. It gives you something to do, frankly, and it also embraces our common reality. We all need to eat. We all share in the common experience of sharing food, and there's something there that I think, and then inviting people under our home and being our guest. There's something. It's hard to have hostility towards somebody that invited you over for dinner. Yeah. I mean, you can. But that treated you just like a person, treated you well, and it wasn't forced, and they didn't lock the door and then do a presentation on you, but just had you over and cared for you and just let you be their guest, or vice versa. That just does so much to, in a sense, advance relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as far as you and your community group go at this point, obviously we're in summer. Some of you guys are meeting infrequently. But I would start with this, just in your own personal life, as you've been living and interacting and, maybe hanging out with people even yesterday for the 4th of July, maybe sit down with your spouse or a close friend and just go, who are some of these relationships maybe that you've had for a long time, or maybe that's newer, but where you really get this sense that they're receiving you, like the passage talks about, where they're welcoming you into their lives and they're not pushing you away based on your faith stance with Jesus. And then that could even be a great opportunity, whenever you do meet next with your community group, to just go, what are some of the relationships that we share together in common that could potentially be a person of peace? And then how can we take steps to really move towards them this year? Not to put a target on their back, not to make them a project, but to invite them into relationship. Because when you invite them further and deeper into relationship with you, you're also at the same time inviting them further and deeper into a relationship with Jesus, right? Because that's who we bring with us.
Absolutely. I think if you look at what Jesus is saying, I think you could just say it this way: a person of peace is an invitation from God. If they are a person of peace, that means God's at work there, and he's inviting us at some level to join into being the hands and feet or voice, if you will, of Jesus, the presence of Jesus in their life. So if there's something that God is doing, and maybe very small ways, maybe just the fact that they want to hang out with you, and that they're not repelled, like you said, by or thrown off by the fact that you go to church or you are a Christian, that's God's invitation, and it may be a long, slow work, but we get to be part of that, and so just hear it as God's invitation to take a next step. And like Scott said, the next step maybe is identifying who those people are, and then saying, okay, well, what's a hospitality step we could take? Have them over, share a meal. Yeah. Just those steps of building blocks of relationship where God, and then look for ways that God is at work in their life, or maybe through brokenness, maybe through a life change and transition, having kids, or a stage in their kids' life, or aging parents, or all these things are ways. Many or major crisis in people's lives are often these open places where God is at work. So looking for ways and being alert to ways that God is working there.
Yeah. So identify a person, work to love them, unconditionally, and then wait for God to open opportunities. Because if He really is at work, those opportunities will show up. And so when we notice them and are aware of them and have the courage to step through them, that's when we see the Spirit just show up and do amazing things.
Don't forget to pray for them. Don't forget, because and you know, one of the things you can know that you're growing in relationship is if your prayers can become more specific.
Yeah.
Not just pray in general, or even just pray for them to know Christ, but pray for what they would want prayed for. And if you really want to take a next step, pray. Tell them, hey, I'm praying for you. How can I pray for you? And, occasionally someone will refuse prayer. Most of the time they'll take it. And that's another way to even advance not only the relationship, but even the spiritual conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Hope you're having a great start to your July here. And we will see you this Sunday for Summer Table.
See you Sunday.
All righty.
Bye.
Bye.